Hello, everybody, and welcome back. I'm Ted, your host, and in our last lecture, we actually concluded our survey of United States history. In our last lecture, I presented part two of my reflections on the course, and I was sort of grappling on how to end the course. I really liked the reflection. I really liked the way that both of those lectures came together. But there are two exercises that I do with classes. One is "We Didn't Start the Fire," and that is based on the Billy Joel song. And the other is a firefighting exercise, and that is based on the musician who had a popular song back in the early 2000s, 100 Years. And what the firefighting assignment, what classes do is in their groups. I normally break classes up into 5 groups. In their groups, they simply go through 100 years. It was 80 years, but I sort of pushed it to 100 years to make it make more sense, put it in better tone and better perspective for the artist's song that inspired the assignment. And it's 100 years from the current year looking back. So we're in 2018. We will be going back to, let's say, 1919. Yeah, going from 1919 forward. And with the "We Didn't Start the Fire" exercise, that is a singular exercise. It is for one student, and it's a very quick and simple exercise. The students simply list X amount of events for X amount of years. So if you're teaching, let's say, middle schoolers, you would have, 13, 14-year-olds. You would have them simply list 13 to 14 events that they remember clearly in their lives. And there's two ways that this typically goes down with classes. It's either they simply list one event for every year, or they simply pick their favorite events, the things that really stand out to them. And some of these are really local. It's the birth of a sibling, the wedding of a family member, graduation of a family member, a party, a sports team winning. It can be very local, very local, very personal, very intimate like that. Or it could just be a series of like big national events, like Kevin Durant signing with the Warriors, or recently something that made the headlines was LeBron James signing with the Los Angeles Lakers, something big like that. Something like a massive political movement like the Tea Party movement, or the Black Lives Matter movement, the Me Too movement, the Our Lives marches, the women's marches, the Unite the Right marches. All of these major social events, it could be something like that. It could be just a social, just listing major social events that they remember. It can be listing movies they remember, songs that they remember, or that they deem important to them. It can be varied like that. So it takes many forms, many different forms. And for this lecture, I'm going to put out an example, really, of the fire for fighting. And in the next lecture, I will go over in more specifics, I will go over the "We Didn't Start the Fire" exercise, present an example video for that. And I'll also make an accompanying video for the "We Didn't Start the Fire" video, in which I'll sort of detail what I'm planning to do next in the course, and what the new direction is going to be for a future lecture series, for future lectures, and for future I guess content videos that I put out. Not wanting to waste any more time or eat up any more time, let's jump right into it. And for the "We Didn't Start the Fire," I went chronologically. That was easier for me to simply go through everything chronologically, but it's varied. There's some major political events that we would have discussed in class over covering the 20th century. There were little things that that I simply put in there. Little things that would have made that would have had a major impact on somebody, on somebody's life during the years through 1919 to 2018, if the person lived that long. All right, and without further ado, we'll kick things right off with 1919, and first event will be the Red Summer. The Red Summer, 1919. It was a series of riots, race riots, gripping the Republic. After that, Prohibition comes into effect. Prohibition comes into effect in 1920. In 1921, the race riots are still continuing, and we have the Tulsa race riots, one of the more destructive of these race riots. Following that, we had the Teapot Dome scandal. This really brought down the Harding administration. Harding dies during his administration, but there was he died the next year. But there was a very real chance that he would not have skated away from this scandal. Harding, a good politician, a good campaigner, but someone who just attracted controversy, who attracted scandals. 1923, there was a major Supreme Court case, actually, in which a Sikh man, a Punjabi Sikh man, Bhagat Singh Thind, took his case to the Supreme Court. He was arguing that he should become a naturalized U.S. citizen, and that he should be listed as a white person. He was using the argument, and this was like right around the time that the phrase Indo-European was being popularized by scholars and anthropologists and linguists. He was arguing that since he shared a common ancestry with the Europeans, with white Americans, that he should be allowed to become a United States citizen. He should be allowed to become a naturalized United States citizen, and that he should be counted as a white person. And the Supreme Court simply refused. It was out of hand rejected. It was a major case, and again, this goes back to Jim Crow, the United States, and some of the more unsavory aspects of America's social history. And other major events during the 1920s would have been the radio, the toaster, the washing machine, all becoming available for mass public consumption. Ford stops making the Model T, the vacuum cleaner comes out, and of course the stock market crashes and the Dust Bowl begins. Moving into the 1930s, of course, we have the Great Depression. The Great Depression settles in the United States. Franklin Roosevelt is elected. The first New Deal is presented. The film Imitation of Life is released. That is a major controversial film. It involves a European American actress playing a very light-skinned African American character who passes for white passes from I guess what you can say, African American society into European American society. It caused a major controversy. Many people were upset about it. Many people were upset about it, citing racial purity as a reason for their anger, for their outrage. Very controversial, but also very indicative of the social situation of the Republic at the time. The Social Security Act is also passed during the 1930s. The Phantom, which sort of hints at the future and the potential of the comic book industry, that reached a fever pitch during the 1950s and early 1960s, sort of dies down during the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, and in the 2000s and carrying on through the 2000s and 10s, really has become this juggernaut. Most of the television shows now and most of the major films being produced now are based off of comic book material. So the Phantom, back in the 1930s, really hinting at the potential of the comic book industry. Disney really establishes itself with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. That animated film comes out in the 1930s. Minimum wage is established. The Grapes of Wrath is published. A book that I did not like when I had to read it in high school, but one that I make a lot of references to, particularly when I am discussing the Depression. So moving on into the 1930s, Not the 1930s, the 1940s. We have Roosevelt. Being nominated and winning a third term, an unprecedented third term. We had the Pearl Harbor attack, Japanese internment, the Tehran conference between the wartime allies, Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill. The Battle of Leyte Gulf, the atomic bombings occur, the Cold War begins, the Polaroid camera debuts, Alger Hiss's trial, his trial, him and Whittaker Chambers. They sort of gripped the nation. And again, Alger Hiss was convicted because the jurors were they rejected a lot of the things, but they did not reject the fact that Whittaker Chamber knew too many intimate details regarding Alger Hiss's life for him to Hiss to simply be able to claim that he had no knowledge, that he had no knowledge, no interactions. So Hiss is later convicted based solely on the fact that everyone believed that he lied. Harry Truman unveils the Fair Deal, which was a continuation of the sort of strategy, the stratagem, and the catchphrasing of a plan, of a domestic and foreign plan created or brought to the table by Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt introduced what he called the Square Deal. And of course, Franklin Roosevelt picks up where his fifth cousin left off and introduces the New Deal. And right on the heels of Roosevelt, we have Harry Truman and his Fair Deal. So we have the deals sort of being presented to the public. Moving on, we have the Korean War beginning in 1950, the Rosenberg trial. Eisenhower is elected, the Korean War Armistice, which is still pretty shocking. Most people believe that we won the Korean War outright, and two, they're very shocked to learn that we're still technically at war with Korea, being that there was no final peace treaty, there's just an armistice in place. But 1953 brings us the Korean War Armistice, Brown v. Board of Education, the Emmett Till lynching, Elvis Presley releases Heartbreak Hotel, the entire saga surrounding the Little Rock Nine in Arkansas and Orville Faubus's shameful behavior, the Battle of Haines Pond, which was a armed confrontation between Lumbee Native Americans and not even local, but just regional members of the Ku Klux Klan. The entire affair ended with a number of arrests for anti-Klan agents or activists and the Lumbee natives, and I believe like there were one arrest of a member of a Ku Klux Klan, but it ended Klan activity in the area. At least open and about naked showing of force, naked violence, it ended that. And of course the 50-star flag debuts, has the last two states to enter the Union in during the same year, Alaska and Hawaii. The very rare instance in which the flag changed 3 times during the year. We begin the year with the 48-star flag. And by the middle of the year, we transition from that 49-star flag to the 50-star flag, and from 1959 to the present, we've used the 50-star flag. Moving on to the 1960s, we have the Greensboro sit-in, the famous Woolworth sit-in at the Woolworth lunch counters. John Kennedy is sworn in as president. Marilyn Monroe dies. John Kennedy is assassinated. Bewitched, the TV series, begins to air. Malcolm X is assassinated. The very seminal Miranda v. Arizona case is decided. That in that case is one, or at least the Miranda rights have been made infamous by courtroom and police drama television series, and of course the unscripted sort of like precursor to reality television Cops, the television show Cops, in which the officers Mirandize people that they arrested, and of course the Miranda rights are the rights to remain silent. upon arrest, and to be able to remain silent is very powerful. It's a very powerful right. But we get that in the 1960s. We have the assassination of Martin Luther King. Thurgood Marshall becomes the first African American, becomes the first non-European American to join the Supreme Court. Dick Nixon is sworn in as president. Jimi Hendrix dies in 1970. Joe Frazier defeats Muhammad Ali in 1971. Nixon visits China. We had the Roe v. Wade decision, and that's a decision that still really sort of grinds the republic as it is. A lot of emotions are still regarding that decision. We have the resignation of Richard Nixon following the Watergate investigation. Jimmy Hoffa disappears. Jimmy Carter is elected. The Oakland Raiders win Super Bowl 11. Camp David Accords are signed. The Iranian Revolution occurs. Ronald Reagan is elected. The first 5 recognized cases of AIDS appear in 1981. Thriller is released. Thriller is massive. I believe that it still is the best-selling album of all time. The Chicago Tylenol murder cases happen. Somebody tampers with the caps of Tylenol, and it results in unfortunately, it results in some tragic deaths. And that is why we have tamper-proof labels or caps to prevent that sort of tragedy from happening again. Ma Bell, the old Bell phone company, is forced to break up. It breaks up into a number of smaller companies: AT&T, Bell South. And a couple of other ones. I know Verizon, and I believe SBC and Quest are also descended or legacy companies, legacy corporations from former Bell holdings. But Bell breaks up. They finally break up the monopoly, the telephone monopoly, in the 1980s. Windows 1.0 is released in 1985. The Challenger disaster occurs, or the Iran-Contra affair occurs, and then interestingly, there is a major clash the next year between news anchor Dan Rather and then Vice President George H.W. Bush over Bush's role during the Iran-Contra affair. It's very contentious, and I believe the video is still online. And of course, right after that, George H.W. Bush goes on to win the election of 1988, and he's sworn in as president in 1989. The next year, Buster Douglas defeats Mike Tyson, and that is still something that sort of people express shock and dismay over, and that's something that happened over 25 years ago. People are still shocked that Buster Douglas was able to beat Mike Tyson, and the next year we had the Rodney King beating. Hurricane Andrew, a very powerful hurricane that waylaid the Caribbean and southern Florida. Hurricane Andrew strikes in 1992. The next year, Bill Clinton is sworn in as president. The Houston Rockets defeat the New York Knicks. OJ trial. The OJ trial occurs and it ends. Tupac dies. The movie The Fifth Element, one of my favorite movies. I think I must have seen the movie at easily over 250 times. That movie comes out. It has some of my favorite actors in it: Bruce Willis, Chris Tucker, Gary Oldman, and of course Mila Jovovich. The Lewinsky scandal occurs, and I remember Ed Bradley. I remember Ed Bradley interviewing people who were involved in it, and it was just like, wow, this is life now. And the year after that, we had the Columbine Massacre. The Elian Gonzalez affair, Columbine, of course. Lewinsky, we covered Lewinsky. She was the young White House intern who entered into a intimate relationship. It was consensual, but not to the degree that could really be appropriate. There was a major power imbalance. You have a 22-year-old intern and the president of the United States engaging in this clandestine relationship. That for a long time really tarnished her her reputation. She sort of became this punchline, and for him, it nearly toppled his presidency, but he emerged from it stronger and more admired. At least in some quarters. In other quarters, he became someone who's just vilified. The Columbine Massacre was the first real shooting massacre that were perpetrated by students, and I remember it shocked everybody and it terrified everybody. For a while, I was afraid to go to school, but I went to a private school, and nobody was really even like tracking something like that, or at least perpetrating something like that. But it really did terrify a lot of people, and it sort of brought up some awkward conversations, I would say, between a lot of parents and their kids. But that occurred. And it remains really shocking for those of us, a real life-changing event for those of us who lived through it. The Elian Gonzalez affair it involved a Cuban refugee, Elian Gonzalez, whose mother died on the raft ride from Cuba to South Florida. And once he arrived in South Florida, he was taken in by maternal family members. His father and the Cuban government requested that he be returned to his father, and the Justice Department, I want to say it was like the State Department and the Justice Department both agreed. But I remember it was the Justice Department. I remember Janet Reno was the Attorney General. I remember Janet Reno personally taking possession of the boy during using a ruse to take possession of the boy, and they transferred him back to Cuba. After that, the next major event will be the September 11th terror attacks, perhaps the most defining moment of the 21st century for the United States, and I guess for other parts of the world. I remember when I first started taking studying U.S. history seriously, this was a question that people always drew back to. And I wasn't living in the United States when the attacks occurred, so I couldn't really identify that well with it, with those feelings. I remember I was at home on the day, and it sort of had the unfortunate effect of occurring within the same week of a major tragedy in the Bahamas. The straw market, the original straw market, burnt down, and many more people there were really tuning into that. There was a lot of sympathy for the loss in New York City, but there was a real sort of panic for the loss that just occurred in downtown Nassau on Bay Street. But of course, it remains a very pivotal moment for many in the United States. And following the attack, the Department of Homeland Security created. Remarkably, Arnold Schwarzenegger, the actor, the Austrian bodybuilder turned actor, was elected as the governor of California. He will go on to serve 2 terms. Uday and Qusay Hussein, the sons of former Iraqi President Saddam Hussein, they're killed. And I remember this event, and I remember this being sort of like the moment that I really felt like social anger or social disgust. I remember they were killed, and the bodies were put on display. And the rationale was to show people that they were dead, but it was just really a disgusting moment, at least to me, to simply not just put out that they were gone and to hand the bodies over to their mother or their wives, but to simply but to simply keep the bodies on to simply put the bodies up on display. Yeah, that I remember that vividly. I remember the bodies being on display, and they had some soldiers posted pulling sentry duty, pulling guard duty on their remains. Um, yeah, Abu Ghraib, another sort of like black mark on the Iraq War and the policies of the Bush administration. Abu Ghraib involved the torture and the psychological abuse of prisoners being held by the United States military. There was a series of just really a series of photographs of soldiers sort of delighting in humiliating and torturing the prisoners being held. And of course, Hurricane Katrina struck New Orleans, and from there we had the very infamous George Bush doesn't care about black people speech delivered by Kanye West at a charity event. Caused a major uproar. Many people supported Kanye West's comments. George Bush has come out and said, he was very hurt by it. He said that he later spoke with Kanye about it, but that he was very hurt and couldn't be the farthest thing from his mind. It's still a lot of people remember that event as well when Kanye West said that. And of course, the housing market crash of the mid 2000s. There was the Virginia Tech massacre, the election of Barack Obama, the death of Michael Jackson, the Tea Party movement in the wake of Barack Obama's election, the Occupy Wall Street movement in the aftermath of the fiscal mismanagement of members of Wall Street and other sort of economic bigwigs and corporate executives, the shooting of Trayvon Martin, Robert Bales, that's another major one. Trayvon Martin's death sort of sparked the Black Lives Matter movement and sort of raised the specter for questionable incidents involving African Americans and in American society. The shootings or physical assaults or really just hostile actions. 2018 has seen a lot of them. Twitter and other social media platforms have been really active in sort of highlighting those type of events. The water situation in Flint Massacre, the contamination of the water sources, the outbreak of all those cases of Legionnaire's disease. I believe it's like 12,000 people had like lead poisoning, and there are 15 deaths confirmed or at least acknowledged so far from Legionnaire's disease. And I think there's only like 15 criminal indictments so far, including 5 involuntary manslaughter charges from the entire situation in Flint, Michigan. There was the Charlottesville Unite the Right march, the Harvey Weinstein Me Too the Harvey Weinstein controversy and the Me Too movement, the March for Lives and the Red for Ed movements, and one very humorous sort of factoid that I found was in 2006, right at the fever pitch of the Black Lives Matter movement, and really at a time where there was a real sort of ebb and flow in which there was a shooting situation in which police officers were targeted in Dallas, and there was there were other shootings of high-profile shootings of unarmed black men in Louisiana and in Minnesota. On the heels of that, there was an advisory warning issued by the government of the Bahamas to not incite or engage in any sort of confrontation with American police officers because of the racial tensions in the United States to simply identify yourself as a foreign national and to request access to consulates. I remember they gave out the location and the phone numbers of consulates offices throughout the United States. And that wraps up that wraps up the Fire for Fighting video. Hit like, subscribe, and comment. Let me know what you thought about it. These are just some of the examples. And again, I'll go over it again in the next videos. And at the end of the next series, I'll sort of fine tune it. But these aren't, or at least this model isn't really just fine tuned. Isn't really locked in. It doesn't have to be chronological. It can simply be 100 events, any 100 events during this 100-year period. Once again, thank you guys. Hit like, subscribe, and comment once again, and I will see you guys next time for another lecture.